When cast aside by friends and acquaintances, life can be very challenging, especially if it's for reasons out of your control. You can bear it, grit your teeth and try to go on, or move elsewhere to begin anew and hope you can find a new community to be a part of. For one man in Japan, however, revenge was the answer. Revenge against an entire village. This is the true, solved case of the Tsuyama Incident. This video is going to be extremely detailed, slow burning, and a little heavy due to the scale of the case, so consider this your warning. I will go quite in depth about the perpetrator's upbringing and aspects of Japanese culture, but I promise it will all be worth the wait for the incident itself. Many of my viewers ask for more details on the cases I cover, so here you go. If you're a returning viewer or someone new to the channel, welcome. I make videos on Japanese cases, strange, solved and unsolved. If that sounds like something you think you'll find interesting, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. In any case, let's get on with the video. Mutsuo Toi was born on the 5th of March 1917, the 6th year of the Taisho era, in the Kurami area of a village called Kamo in the Tomata district of Okayama Prefecture, Japan. His father, Shinichiro, then 38 years old, was making his living as a charcoal maker. Like most able-bodied men in Japan at the time, he also had military experience. He'd been sent abroad to fight in the Russo-Japanese War and became a private first class in the reserve forces upon his return. He was a very heavy drinker, but despite this and his hard life both in work and as a combat veteran, he was said to be a very gentle, harmonious person who never had any trouble. He got on very well with others and was a respectable member of the community. Mutsuo's mother Masayo, then 22 years old, was the daughter of a farming family who married into the Toi family when she was 17. Unlike her husband, she was said to be prone to anger and had a short temper, but was just your average, hard-working farming wife. She toiled away both in the fields and with her homemaking duties. Before Mutsuo was born, the couple had a daughter named Minako, who was around 3 years older than her younger brother. The Toi family were well-off landowners, got along very well, and had what looked like a prosperous future ahead of them. They had steady employment, easy access to food, and were a loving family. But sadly, a terrible fate would suddenly befall them. You see, the family was plagued by tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is an infectious disease that primarily affects the lungs and is caused by the MTB bacteria. It has existed since antiquity, with the remains of some prehistoric humans from over 6,000 years ago being discovered to have suffered the affliction. While considered old-timey, it is actually still the world's top infectious killer, with nearly 4,500 losing their lives and 30,000 falling ill each day to it. In fact, almost 2 billion people today have it in their bodies. Symptoms include coughing, night sweats, chest pains, weight loss, and fatigue when the disease is active. If severe enough, coughing up blood is also pretty common. It is from water droplets through coughing that tuberculosis most commonly spreads to others, but there is evidence to suggest that there is also a genetic component. Although it varies depending on the type and a number of other factors, it usually takes up to 3 years to pass away from the disease without proper modern treatment. While modern medicines can cure it today, during the early 20th century, it was both untreatable and incurable. If you caught it, that was it. It was over. In Japan, those who contracted tuberculosis were kept isolated in sanatoriums and ostracized from the community. With the disease being fatal, people kept their distance from the infected and even avoided family members of those who had it. Despite being treatable and much rarer now, this stigma and fear of tuberculosis continues in Japan even to this day. In fact, in order for a non-Japanese citizen to live in Japan, one has to submit a chest X-ray to prove that they do not have the disease in most circumstances. On the 18th of July 1918, Mutsuo's grandfather on his father's side passed away from this terrible ailment at the age of 62. That same year, on the 1st of December, the father Shinichiro also passed at the age of 39. Upon her husband's death, the mother Masayo stayed in bed both out of sickness and grief. On the 29th of April 1918, she also passed away from tuberculosis. she was 24 years old. At just 2 years old, an age when he could barely talk or understand anything in the world, Mutsuo and his older sister lost both their parents. At this time in Japan, families with many cases such as this were shunned and regarded as rogai suji, or tuberculosis lineage, so faced discrimination for being perceived as a threat to others. The relatives of the Toi family gathered and had a debate as to who should take over the family and inheritance. Since Mutsuo was young and a member of the so-called tuberculosis lineage who would likely perish anyway, it was decided that he would not be allowed to succeed the family headship, and instead one of his grandfather's younger brothers, Mutsuo's great-uncle, was chosen. Mutsuo still received roughly 13,000 square meters of rice fields and 8,000 square meters of mountain forest in Kurami though, which made up a portion of the inheritance from his parents. With both parents deceased, 55-year-old grandmother Ine, who had not passed like the others in the immediate family, became the guardian of Mutsuo and his older sister Minako. Since she was not related by blood to the grandfather and was his second wife, it was hoped that she would not suffer from the disease and be part of the tuberculosis lineage. The siblings moved to a rented home in the region of Tatsu with their grandmother Ine in 1920. Around this time and in the years leading up to it, the price of rice was growing very fast in the country, causing unrest and rice riots as people struggled to feed themselves. Ine, fearing backlash against rice farmers like herself who were earning a good living from the inflation prices, was quoted as saying, "Farmers welcome the price increase, but these are scary times. Will we be killed? I'm frightened." While there was a lot of envy towards farmers, fortunately the remaining siblings and grandmother were not targeted by rioters. However, it made the grandmother a little fearful and protective of her grandchildren. During their years in Tatsu, Mutsuo and Minako played together every day, growing extremely close. They were often heard singing children's songs, playing maritsuki, a traditional Japanese ball game, and juggling beanbags, something Minako was very skilled at. People have described Minako as a bright, cheerful girl. She was very popular in the community, and it is said that her positive influence helped Mutsuo. Mutsuo looked up to his sister a lot and perhaps even idolized her. With sparkles in his eyes, he would watch his sister play skillfully while telling her how great she was at the games she played. It seems that Mutsuo was a quiet, obedient boy who never argued with his grandmother or sister, but got on very well with them and others. In 1922, the siblings once again moved with their grandmother to the Kaio hamlet of Yukishige in western Kamo, where Ine intended to live permanently. She sold some of the land Mutsuo had received when his parents died to buy a large, splendid house together with some rice fields for 500 yen. The area was actually Ine's birthplace, so she had many friends in the area and could integrate very well. Mutsuo and Minako, however, knew nobody and were now in a very unfamiliar area, so they became a little isolated and mostly kept to themselves. The home they moved into, while grand and spacious, also seems to have had a dark past. According to the previous tenant, the elderly Sho Terai, her former husband Tsunejiro, who lived there, was having an affair with Tae, the wife of Tokuzo Fujiyabashi from another village. Tsunejiro would go to the Fujibayashi home for this adulterous relationship, when one day Tae's husband Tokuzo would catch them in the act. Enraged at being exposed and unable to continue his affair, Tsunejiro returned to his own home, grabbed his katana, and went back to the Fujibayashi home to take the life of Tae. For reasons unexplained, he could not do it, so instead slashed her husband Tokuzo before turning the katana on himself. Tsunejiro was 21 years old at the time, and with the manner of how this horrible, unfortunate event occurred, some look back on the details as though it were a fate that the Toi family would move into this home, for reasons you will soon discover. In 1923, Mutsuo should have gone to elementary school, but because he was born prematurely and prone to poor health, Ine decided to delay his enrollment for a year. An education affairs employee from the town hall came to the Toi home numerous times to try to persuade her to let Mutsuo join, but the grandmother wouldn't budge on her decision, and so the education affairs department eventually relented and let her have her way. On the 1st of September 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake struck, causing tremendous destruction across the country and over 100,000 people to sadly lose their lives or go missing. This once again instigated unrest as food prices rose and availability of many commodities became limited. Fearing that people would come after the farmers, Ine further isolated Mutsuo from the world for a time, going as far as to lock the storm shutters and windows of the home out of fear that rioters could come after them at any moment. She would even tell postmen and the police that only children and elderly people lived in the home so that they should be mindful of that. With this, young Mutsuo would spend time alone for most of the day, waiting for his sister Minako to return home from school so they could play. Finally, in April 1924, Mutsuo would enter into the West Kamo Ordinary Elementary School. He would walk 4 kilometers there and back to the school every day on a rough country road in wooden clogs to get there. Mutsuo didn't really want to go to school at first, but immediately after he enrolled, he went like any other student, much to the relief of the education affairs employee and homeroom teacher. Despite his late start, Mutsuo surprisingly excelled at his studies. Out of a maximum score of 10 points, he received 9 in ethics, 9 in Japanese language, 10 in arithmetic, 8 in art, 8 in singing, 8 in gymnastics, and got a good rating on conduct. This placed him second in his class, earning him respect from teachers and his peers. Mutsuo's homeroom teacher Kayako Ito was quoted as saying, "He is obedient and always takes care of the teachers, making him a model student in the class. As a result, his academic performance is excellent and no action is needed for him to improve in regards to this. He is good and takes care of the other students, but his health is quite bad, and he is often absent from school with a cold. He should strive to come to school more." School attendance was indeed an issue for Mutsuo. In his first school year of 184 days, he was absent for 77 of them. While some of this was due to illness, it was mostly because of Ine, who raised Mutsuo like a spoilt child and would make him miss school even if it was slightly rainy or windy outside. Even if he was feeling perfectly fine and wanted to go to school, she would keep him home for even the slightest thing. He spent so much time off school and staying indoors that he grew pale, which earned him the nickname Owl from his school peers, meaning blue since his face was unnaturally void of colour. One time, a concerned teacher went to visit the family home, believing Mutsuo was truly sick. He expected to find the boy in bed with a fever, but instead found him playing around with his grandmother, thus learning the truth about all the absences. Luckily, in 1925, during his second year, his absences would decrease to a total of 31 days, much lower than 77. However, his grades started to slip a little. His score in ethics dropped to 8 and to 9 for arithmetic, but grades for other classes remained the same. In his school evaluation, his teacher was quoted as saying, "He is calm and has a good attitude towards his studies, but other students often chat to him privately and distract him." His grades were still very impressive and his absences were going down, but Ine was continuing to be overly protective of him. When Mutsuo got injured near the eye by another student in a school game and came home crying, the grandmother stormed into that student's home and screamed, "Mutsuo is the heir to the Toy family. He could have been blinded. You're making fun of him for not having parents. Don't try anything like that again." Although Ine was usually calm and was well liked in the small community where everyone knew each other, she was known to snap or become irrationally afraid or angry, especially when she felt like Mutsuo was being threatened. In 1926, things started to get better. He was only absent for 25 days in the year, his grades improved even more, and his teacher was quoted as saying that he was not in poor health, his studies were going well, and he was a lovable student. And so, Mutsuo was chosen to be head of the class. He ran home to tell Ine, who took his certificate and went around the neighborhood to boast of his achievement. Minako was so happy for her brother too. To celebrate, Ine made sekihan, a mixture of rice and red beans, for the family to enjoy, and even distributed it to the neighbors so they could all share in the good news. Mutsuo began to grow and expand out of his isolated life in the village. During an autumn festival, he purchased 5 second-hand volumes of Shonen Club from a street stall. Shonen Club was a monthly boys magazine that featured articles, poetry, serialized novels, and even manga. Despite being aimed at children much older than him in their middle school ages, Mutsuo had a very high IQ and read the books from cover to cover, even faster than his older sister Minako could. Some of the books contained violent or mature stories that probably were more in line with those towards adults, which likely exposed him to some inappropriate themes at a young age. In 1927, now the Showa era of Japan, Mutsuo began his 4th year of school and started studying science, for which he also earned a top grade of 10. His art grade also improved to 9. His absences, however, increased to 40 days, but even still he was hardworking enough to continue his duties as head of the class and was considered the smartest boy in the village. His teacher at the time, Teiji Shimakawa, was quoted as saying, "His personality is honest and calm, but he isn't so cheerful and can be negative. He is strong-willed and stubborn, so he can be one-sided at times. His body is not healthy or robust. He suffers from headaches and is often absent, so he does not like exercise or sports. His academic performance is particularly outstanding in intellectual subjects, where he has a good memory and is always top of the class. He is, however, not as good in the skills subjects. He is diligent in class, dresses well, speaks clearly, and is precise in his movements, but is not agile." From 1927 to 1930, Mutsuo's grades would fluctuate, but would always stay very high and above his peers generally, even when new subjects like history and geography were added. He took many absences due to headaches during these years, but it wasn't so bad to affect his studies, and he was said to be unpretentious and eager to learn. In spring 1929, Minako graduated from junior high school and instead of pursuing higher education, went to work in the family fields together with Ine. In 1930, Mutsuo finished elementary school and moved straight into the advanced course at the same school, where he was also the head of the class again this year thanks to his excellent grades. As usual, he was described very positively by his teachers and earned much praise. Around this time, Mutsuo met a girl named Takako Asai who was in the year below him. She was a pale, delicate and quiet girl who didn't really stand out, but it seems Mutsuo took a liking to her. One day when he saw her on his way home from school, he ran up to her and shoved a piece of paper in the wrapping she was carrying before fleeing without saying a word. When she cautiously unfolded it, she saw a drawing of a girl with pigtails. The drawing was painstakingly shaded with a pencil and had clearly had a lot of work put into it, being described as something as detailed as a photograph. It seems he had imitated the drawings found in some of his books by Katsuichi Kabashima to pull off such fine work at a young age. Mutsuo had written "Portrait of Takako" next to the face, and at the bottom, "I like Takako," along with Mutsuo's signature were written. Takako was very happy to receive the drawing, but thought it looked more like Mutsuo's sister Minako rather than herself. She took the drawing home and hid it in a desk drawer, but Takako's younger brother found it. When their mother also saw it, she scolded Takako and took the drawing to her homeroom teacher at the school. A teacher came to visit the toy family home the next day and spoke to Minako about the circumstances surrounding it. The teachers didn't come to scold Mutsuo, but asked the sister to keep an eye on her brother in the future. In the end, Minako never spoke of the teacher's visit to the home and was a little bothered that the drawing did indeed resemble her a little. Mutsuo's first attempt at love ended in failure and likely left a mark on him. Despite this, Mutsuo continued to work hard over the years, earning very high grades and even became head of the class a 3rd time, which was very rare and unheard of for the village. One day before his 3rd term began, his homeroom teacher called Mutsuo into an office and said, "Your grades are good, so it would be a waste to become a farmer. Besides, your family are in a position where they can afford tuition. Why don't you enroll in higher education?" Given how serious he took his studies, Mutsuo naturally intended to do this. After speaking with his teacher, Mutsuo returned home and told Ine that he wanted to continue his education at an Okayama prefectural school. To do so, he would need to leave the home to live in a boarding school, and with Minako likely to get married in a few years as women commonly did young back in those days, it would mean that Ine would be left all alone. Ine strongly opposed the idea of Mutsuo going away to study. It is said that the atmosphere at dinner that evening was very awkward, and Ine could barely eat before going to bed, where she could be heard quietly sobbing by the siblings. The following day, Mutsuo would return to the homeroom teacher, and tell him that he would actually not be continuing higher education. Under pressure from his grandmother, he couldn't leave her, especially because all throughout his studies, he was toiling away at the farm for the family business. Yes, despite all the schoolwork, Mutsuo was often helping on the farm, as was expected in those communities. In 1932, soon after his graduation, Mutsuo came down with a very high fever. Ine and Minako did their best to nurse him back to health, but the fever lasted for 3 straight days. A doctor who examined him claimed that he was suffering from pleurisy, an inflammation of the membrane surrounding the lungs and the lining of the chest cavity. Another doctor at the Sagano hospital gave him a medical examination and told Mutsuo that he would recover if he rested at home. He didn't have to be bedridden, but the doctor strongly advised that he be forbidden from performing any farm work or physical labor, so for 3 months, Mutsuo just idled away his time at home. Eventually, he got better, got the all clear from the doctor, and despite protests from Minako and Ine, entered into the village supplementary lessons school to boost his academic knowledge. But uncharacteristically, Mutsuo was not his usual diligent self, and only attended a handful of days. It seemed the illness had made Mutsuo begin to worry about his health. In 1934, a big change would happen for the family. On the 15th of March, the now 21-year-old Minako would marry into the Kijima family through her husband, 25-year-old Ichiro. Because of this, 17-year-old Mutsuo would fall into isolation. Throughout his entire life, he had been extremely close to his older sister, but now she was gone. In many ways, Minako had been the one Mutsuo looked to in a motherly way, not their grandmother Ine. Mutsuo couldn't really talk to his grandmother on a personal level, but he could with his sister. He became socially withdrawn, rarely showing up to the school or the village's Young Persons Association. He converted his attic space into a narrow room and mostly spent days locked away up there alone. However, with children, it was a completely different story. Mutsuo would gather the neighborhood children together to tell them stories, which they really enjoyed and looked forward to hearing. He would tell them about the stories he read about in books and shonen club, but recite them in a way that was easy to understand and appropriate for children of that age. Due to his high intelligence, he was a very skilled storyteller and became very popular with his audience. He even provided snacks for the children that they couldn't normally get. Mutsuo enjoyed storytelling so much that he even began to write his own novel to tell the children, named Yoto Kaiomaru, which seems to have been about the adventures of a Japanese ship on the high seas. Sadly, Mutsuo began to become lazy and irresponsible in school, which was completely opposite from his earlier years where he excelled well above his peers. This caused a lot of worry and confusion for the teachers of the area, who had high hopes for his future. He was arguably the most intelligent person in the village at this point. One teacher even visited the toy home multiple times to encourage Mutsuo to study and take the examination to allow him to go to a vocational school. Mutsuo took this advice, borrowed books from the teacher, and began to study hard. One day, when buying some books of his own in Tsuyama City, he met a friend named Yuichi Imada. He was probably Mutsuo's only friend at the time, since Mutsuo had become extremely withdrawn. When Yuichi asked about the books Mutsuo was buying, he replied with, "I'm going to take this special examination and become a teacher." Yuichi asked something personal to Mutsuo, whether he had spent the night with a woman. When Mutsuo sheepishly said he had not, the two went to a shady street in Osaka to do just that, and there was where Mutsuo first engaged in such activities. The friends would go back a few times, but while studying at home one night, the now 19-year-old Mutsuo once again became sick with a fever in October 1935. It is said that he even coughed up a little blood this time too, which naturally came as quite a shock. He went to Sagano Hospital and underwent a medical examination. The doctor told him that he was suffering from pulmonary catarrh, inflammation of the upper lungs. Mutsuo was once again told to cease all farm work and get some rest. He was also given a week's supply of medicine. With repeated illnesses affecting the lungs, he was starting to become very concerned. In 1936, Mutsuo turned 20 years old, and it was in this year when a rather sensational incident occurred in Japan. On the 18th of May of this year, Sada Abe murdered her lover named Kichizo Ishida before removing his male parts and carrying them around with her inside her kimono. I won't go into too much detail about this case now since I intend to make a video on it in the future, but this incident fascinated Mutsuo, compelling him to buy all newspapers detailing the case and cataloguing them in a notebook. He even went as far as trying to reproduce a copy of Sadaabe's confession he borrowed from his friend Yuichi, which had been smuggled out of the courts and was being sold on the black market by the Yakuza. He said to this friend, "I'm going to do something big like Sadaabe," an ominous comment that would sadly prove to be very true. It seems that the erotic nature of the crime ignited a strong desire in Mutsuo's mind, and so he relentlessly pursued 33-year-old Matsuko Terai, the wife of another man in the same hamlet. Surprisingly, she accepted his advances, and it seems that this was a turning point for Mutsuo. They appear to have somewhat started a relationship, and Mutsuo would continue to see her enough to develop feelings for her. This relationship, coupled with the worry about his illness, compelled him to seek physical pleasure in the hopes that he would forget his unfortunate fate. Because he was successful with one woman though, he started to go after others constantly. He even tried to make propositions to Matsuko's family members, but despite his quick success with her, the others all rejected him. Although Mutsuo was still a little isolated, and didn't spend much time with others his age, especially when it came to nightlife, from around February 1937, he began observing people in the village doing what is called yobai. I won't go into too much detail considering the nature of this thing, but yobai, literally meaning night crawling, is no longer practiced, but it was an ancient Japanese custom that began as an action for visiting women to ask for their hand in marriage. It was considered to be the first step towards finding a wife, but quickly changed into a practice where one would visit the home of a romantic interest purely in order to have consensual physical relations. Yobai was actually encouraged in order to help young people become accustomed to physical intimacy and encourage them to have children. It was practiced all over the country, mostly in farming and fishing villages where communities are close and labor is common, and each area had its own set of rules that had to be followed strictly under threat of punishment. While it was mostly the men who visited the woman, there were areas where it was customary for the women to visit the men, and some places where either was allowed. People usually had freedom to visit anyone they wanted under the area's rules, and the visited person had the right to refuse the advances of the visitor. Although older, married people also took part in many areas, it was predominantly done by young, single, unmarried people. As Japan started to develop, society began to look down on the custom. During the Tokugawa era, laws came into effect that even banned it on moral grounds, but rural areas continued the practice free of any interference. During the Meiji Restoration and its emphasis on modernization and the adoption of Western ideas, yobai was further forbidden. The introduction of modern technology like electric streetlights also led to its decline, since people were unable to sneak between houses under the cover of darkness like they used to. Although the Japanese government often cited morality when it put its laws in place, one of the key reasons for getting rid of yobai was because the government wanted to bring farmers from rural areas into the city and entice them to pay for physical activities at designated establishments instead, since it would benefit the economy. By the Taisho and Showa eras, yobai was mostly stopped, but up in the mountain villages outside of strict government control, it still had a presence, and Mutsuo's village was no exception. Mutsuo, however, acted a little bizarre and callous. Instead of doing yobai himself, he would sneak out to witness others doing it so he could ascertain the intimate connections between the villagers and use that information to his advantage by threatening to expose people's secret activities. He first set his sights on 31-year-old Mio, the wife of 50-year-old Kazuo Okamoto. Through his spying on yobai participants, he learned that Mio was being visited by 60-year-old Kuraichi Terai, the wealthiest person in the village. Mio had borrowed money from him and was therefore paying it off through intimate relationships behind her husband's back. One night when her husband was away in Okayama, Mutsuo went to Mio's home under the yobai custom and used what he knew about her affair with another man to get his way. Mutsuo did yobai with Mio many times after this, and although it was through pressure, he started to develop some feelings for her. At this time, Mutsuo's health was beginning to deteriorate. With all the illnesses concerning his lungs in recent years, he knew that tuberculosis was coming for him and was slowly starting to realize that he was going to follow the fate of his parents. On the 1st of April 1937, Mutsuo applied for a loan at the Tsuyama branch of the Okayama Prefectural Agriculture and Industrial Bank, claiming to be for the purpose of buying cattle. It was unusual for an individual to apply for such a loan, but when Mutsuo put all 1,000 meters squared of his farmland up as collateral, the loan was successful and he received 400 yen on the 26th of the same month, which is about 2.5 million yen or $17,000 in today's money as the current exchange rate goes. Mutsuo was contracted to pay back this loan in 15 years, but he never had any intentions of doing so. He was thinking of a secret plan. Mutsuo actually intended to use all the money he had received for the loan to try to cure tuberculosis. He had visited Sagano Hospital as usual for treatment, but no longer trusted the doctors and so decided to take matters into his own hands. Mutsuo bought all the books about tuberculosis he could find at multiple bookstores around Tsuyama and even ordered the latest medical journals via mail order. It was the time before penicillin and streptomycin were available in Japan, so Mutsuo bought many new drugs or so-called miracle cures and tried them out, making his own concoctions using the materials he read in a desperate attempt to save his own life. He even took things to the extreme with pseudoscience methods. He drank cow's blood he had obtained from a slaughterhouse which led to stomach pains, and even drank petroleum that resulted in a terrible sickness. In the end, nothing worked, and all the money he'd received from the loan was for nothing. Mutsuo had thought of entering into a tuberculosis sanatorium to live out his days and hope for some treatment, but because his grandmother Ine would be left all alone in the home, she persuaded him not to go. Mutsuo also didn't want to end his intimate relationships with Matsuko and Mio, which he was continuing through Yobai. With treatment out of the picture, Mutsuo began to use his loan money to indulge in extreme luxuries. He bought butter, milk, and even exotic fruits like bananas to try to increase his nutrition, and even gifted the children in the village with such items when he told them stories. He also bought his lovers in the village gifts every time they met during Yobai to entice them to continue accepting his advances. Although Mutsuo's complexion was rather pale from his ailments, as you can see from his photo, he had quite a stocky build and was on the taller side for Japanese people at the time, standing at 166 centimeters tall. And he was still a young adult and so thought about joining the Japanese military. At this time in Japan's history under imperialism, being a member of the military was an incredibly honorable act and a rite of passage for men. All able-bodied men were expected to serve in the military in some way, and so in May 1937, Mutsuo submitted his enlistment application on the first day that they were open to be accepted. The person in charge of the application at the Military Affairs Office was actually Mutsuo's neighbor, Noboru Nishikawa. When he met Mutsuo, Mutsuo said, "Mr. Nishikawa, I have tuberculosis. I appreciate your help." Noboru was surprised because he had no idea Mutsuo had this illness, and it is not something someone would say to others, let alone on such an application. On the 22nd of the same month, the enlistment exam was held, and Mutsuo was given a grade C, which was a failure as only A and B grades were accepted. When the military doctor confirmed once and for all that he indeed had tuberculosis, Mutsuo, on the verge of tears, exclaimed, "Military doctor, are you sure I have tuberculosis? Please examine me again." The military doctor got angry at this, saying, "Are you doubting a military doctor of the Imperial Japanese Army? I'm certain you have tuberculosis. Get medical treatment. Are you fit to serve as a soldier in the Imperial Army with a body like that?" Upon hearing this, Mutsuo burst into tears on the spot. This was the height of Japanese militarism, when passing enlistment was the pride and honor of a man, and a necessary part for adulthood. His failure would be considered a great shame for himself, his family, and his community. Mutsuo knew he would have a hard time fitting in from here on. He was now in a complete state of despair. He had full confirmation that he indeed had tuberculosis, the same illness that killed both his parents while he was still a baby. He strongly believed that his death was near, and not only that, but now the secret was out too. It was only a matter of time before others around him knew of his deadly, infectious disease, and they would shun him for it. One evening in early June 1937, a couple of weeks after his failed enlistment examination, 42-year-old Tome Nishikawa, wife of Hideji, was returning home one day when Mutsuo called out to her, inviting her into his house under the pretext of having something to ask her. When she entered, he made a move, using his knowledge of her affair with Kuraichi Terai and threatening to expose that if he didn't get his way. He even became violent. However, she was fortunately defiant, saying, "Who told you such a thing? Speak." Mutsuo was taken aback by this and fell silent, so she went on. "You were not enlisted because you have tuberculosis. If that's the case, shouldn't it be the duty of a young man to get better as soon as possible so he can serve his country? Instead, you're taking it lightly and making moves on a woman? Besides, I'm married. Approaching someone else's wife is outrageous. I didn't know you were so shameless. I'll tell your grandmother and the police station of this. If I do nothing, I'm afraid of what you'll do in return." Mutsuo was flustered and didn't know what to do, but sat on the floor and bowed before her, saying, "Please forgive me. Please forgive me. What you said is true." He was crying with his forehead touching the floor. Tome spread word of what had happened all throughout the village. Since everyone knew each other in such a small place, when something got out, everyone quickly knew. Truth be told, Tome had actually had relations with Mutsuo before this incident, and it was actually she herself who had approached Mutsuo. But once his bad attitude towards women started getting out, she began telling people that he was a bad person, she had rejected those advances, and that others should avoid him. She kept her own activities secret, however. Maybe out of deep sadness and wanting to forget about his fate, Mutsuo began to pursue women more and more at this point. It seems that he was starting to feel more and more sick, and so he was desperate to enjoy his time with women in an attempt to feel better. On the 9th of July, he began to do yobai with 49-year-old widow Sukiyo when she refused to allow Mutsuo to do yobai with her eldest daughter, 18-year-old Misa. Since Mutsuo wasn't a popular person by this point through his aggressive nature, he actually had to pay her. He also began pursuing another widow, 44-year-old Toyo. Through spying on people doing yobai as previously mentioned, he had discovered she too was secretly seeing Kuraichi Terai, and so Mutsuo used this as leverage to get what he wanted. Although she reluctantly agreed to have relations, she told others that she rejected him. Towards the end of July, Mutsuo bought a double-barreled shotgun for 75 yen from the Ishida gun shop before receiving a license on the 27th of October from the Tsuyama police station. He explained that the reason for his application was because he had tuberculosis, he was unable to work, but exercise like walking was essential for recovery. But since the act of wandering around while others worked is shameful, he wanted to use the time to hunt, so that the animals could be provided as food or pelts for the military. He also claimed that he wanted to train himself with firearms so that when he could enlist, he would be a skilled shooter. It is likely that he started to feel the hatred of the women of the village now that they were growing to dislike him more and more. While the true motive for acquiring the weapon was unknown, it is widely believed that it was done as a silent threat to prevent Tome and the other women from spreading rumors and gossip about him, and also to get women to do what he wanted when money, threats, and goods would not work. Mutsuo walked around the village holding it, seemingly in a statement to show the women and even the men that he was boss, and that they shouldn't mess with him, that they should keep his illness and his methods of getting what he wants a secret. He even showed it to Kuraichi Terai, the man having affairs with some of the women Mutsuo had relations with. This plan, however, backfired, and instead of feeling so scared that they submitted to his will, the women grew very fearful of him and began to outright avoid him. They were scared more of what he would do than of his tuberculosis or the immorality of his actions. They ran from him, locked their doors, and refused to talk to him. In 1938, Mutsuo visited a moneylender to acquire more money. He told the lender that he wanted to use the money to enter into a tuberculosis sanatorium, but this was a complete lie. He was planning something bigger. The lender offered him 600 yen after doing a detailed inspection of Mutsuo's land and house, which were put up as collateral. After receiving the money, he traveled to Takagi gun shop in Kobe, where he purchased a new shotgun. Selling his old double-barreled one for 80 yen, he used that money and added 110 yen to purchase a brand new Browning Auto 5. He didn't have the money on hand, so decided to pay it via a cash-on-delivery parcel. On the 28th of February, he received it and hid it in his attic. He modified the magazine to allow it to hold 9 shells instead of the standard 5, and also bought shell casings and gunpowder to manufacture shells that shoot dum-dum bullets, which expand on impact to cause more damage. After realizing it wasn't doing him any favors, Mutsuo stopped showing his weapon to others, but continued doing yobai to those who would allow it. He would take his new item into the mountains to practice. The shots were heard by others, but because of the Marco Polo Bridge incident the previous year, military training in schools had already begun, so it wasn't unusual to hear shooting all throughout the day in any town at the time. Around this time, Mutsuo was caught in the act of yobai with Mio Okamoto by her husband Kazuo, so he fled in a panic. Kazuo was naturally so upset that he threw out his wife and made Mio return to the home of her parents. Mutsuo returned to Kazuo's home later to apologize. Because he was afraid, he brought 2 men along with him, one of whom was Yuichi and the other was a friend he met through purchasing the Browning Auto 5. He handed over sake and a pack of meat as a gift to ask for forgiveness, and Kazuo was delighted. He had Mio return home, and with their new provisions, they all had a cheerful party. It seems that in places where yobai was practiced, adultery wasn't as frowned upon. Mutsuo claimed that the meat was from rabbits he had hunted, and Kazuo sung in pleasure upon hearing it. Maybe this could have been an opportunity that turned Mutsuo's standing around in the village. However, the story about the meat was a lie. It was actually the meat from Mutsuo's own pet dog, named Koro. During the party, Mutsuo had only pretended to eat it as the others dined. When Yuichi found out about this, he vomited. While dog meat is eaten in many Asian countries, it isn't in Japan, and the Japanese feel the same way as Westerners do about it. Despite being caught and asking for forgiveness, Mutsuo actually continued to go to Mio's room for yobai behind Kazuo's back. And once again he would openly carry his gun while doing so, and if a woman refused, hid from him, or the husband or family got in the way, he would say, "I'll kill you," while brandishing his weapon. It wasn't his Browning Auto 5, but instead another weapon of unknown origin. Even his own grandmother Ine started to fear him. In fact, she took things further than most. On the 17th of March 1938, she claimed that Mutsuo was trying to poison her with a mysterious white powder that he was mixing with water and other liquids. About 10 days prior, Mutsuo began telling her to drink some unknown medicine, claiming that it was good for her health and for elderly people, and that it would help with indigestion. However, it smelled so bad that Ine refused, even when Mutsuo began asking her aggressively every day. Eventually, she caught him secretly putting the so-called medicine in her miso soup, which caused her to flee the home to stay with her nephew for a few days and contact the police. She'd been growing concerned about his aggressive behavior for a while, but this was the last straw. She told her nephew, "Mutsuo is trying to kill me, and I'm too scared to be with him." The authorities raided the home on the 12th of March, and after searching the attic, they found a katana, a short sword, 400 rounds of ammunition, and 3 guns. A search of his person also found a large concealed dagger. These items were confiscated and his gun license was revoked. Mutsuo claimed that he had a large amount of such items because he anticipated prices to rise due to the Sino-Japanese War, and so was innocently stocking up. He also claimed he needed the blades for his mountain work and to recover from his illness, and that the white powder he was giving to his grandmother was actually a commercially available medicine named Wakamoto. He said he was worried about her health and so wanted her to take it. The officers, however, rejected such excuses given his actions and attitude in the village. They didn't, however, arrest him, since they found him obedient and cooperative, and he seemed to show remorse. One of the guns was sold for 135 yen, and Mutsuo received the proceeds. After this, the Kamo police would visit Mutsuo 6 times to see how he was doing and give him lectures on what to do with his life in an attempt to get him to change his ways and find a job, since he was just idling away his time when, although sick, he could actually do light work. When news of the authorities' intervention got around, the villagers were relieved, believing that he would calm down and change his ways. Instead, Mutsuo worked secretly to once again obtain a deadly weapon. This merely set his plan back slightly. On the 13th of March, Mutsuo asked his friend Yuichi Imada to buy ammunition for him since, as Mutsuo claimed, he had lost his license. He also managed to acquire a new katana from a dentist by claiming it was a gift for his cousin who had been promoted to the rank of sergeant in the Imperial Army. He got a new dagger from his old friend Yuichi too for 10 yen. While visiting Yuichi, he spoke about Mutsuo visiting Sumiyoshi apartment, which was the place where Sada Abe worked as a woman of the night. The thought of this seemed to excite Mutsuo. From late April to early May, Mutsuo traveled to gun shops in Kobe and Osaka, where he once again purchased a Browning Auto 5 for 160 yen and modified it like before to hold 9 shells instead of the usual 5. All this traveling, sneaky behavior, and dark attitude didn't go unnoticed, however. Matsuko Terai invited Tome Nishikawa to her home, sensing danger. Matsuko said, "Mutsuo Toi is up to something big, so it's too dangerous to stay in the village," before inviting her to travel to Kyoto together. Despite having her difficulties with Mutsuo in the past, Tome refused Matsuko's invitation, saying, "There's no way he would hate me enough to kill me." A few days later, Matsuko fled with her family. For Tome, who stayed behind with her own family, this proved to be a grave mistake. On the 18th and 19th of May, Mutsuo was seen burning many notebooks, memos, newspaper clippings, and books in his garden on a makeshift bonfire for unknown reasons. The books he loved so much and that gave him so much comfort were willingly turned to ash. During the early hours of the 20th, several villagers saw him quickly riding his bike back and forth between his home and the village office along narrow mountain roads. A police station and fire brigade are right beside the office. The reasons for why he did this will become clear later on. All these acts were part of his secret plan. Long had he been frustrated with his life. His parents had passed away while he was still an infant, robbing him of a happy childhood. His overprotective grandmother had prevented him from advancing his education to make more of his life for selfish reasons. His sister had left him alone and depressed when she got married, making it difficult for him to interact with others. He had few friends or people to truly count on. His illness made him weak and unable to work, further driving him away from people and causing him to get more loans. He wasn't fit for the military, bringing great shame on himself and alienating him from others. And the women of the village rejected him, spreading news of his illness which caused him to be shunned by the community and be unable to fulfill physical desires. He had had enough, he was angry, and he had been looking to get some so-called revenge for a long time. There was a reason he was so keen to get his hands on weapons after all, and why for a long time he'd been keeping tabs on people, finding out who would be where and when. It was a small village after all, so everyone knew everyone's business and eavesdropping was easy. The spying during Yobai as well as performing it himself was not just for self-gratification, but for intelligence gathering, finding out even which rooms people slept in and with whom. He was going to pull off what was, until the Kyoto Animation Incident in July 2019, the deadliest massacre committed by an individual in Japanese history. At around 5 PM on the 20th of May 1938, Mutsuo climbed the utility poles in Ishiyama and then in Kaio and cut the electrical lines. He had done a lot of research into what wires to cut and where, skillfully avoiding cutting off power to other villages which would have risked a commotion and a serious reaction. Ishiyama still had power, but Kaio only, where Mutsuo lived, was plunged into complete darkness. Although the area had modernized a lot in recent years, because it was rural it was still prone to blackouts, so most were not so bothered when the lights wouldn't turn on. But still, Genichi Terai went to Mutsuo's home to borrow a battery-powered lamp. Mutsuo removed the lamp from his bicycle and handed it to Genichi while holding a candle. Genichi climbed the utility pole near his home to try to see what was going on, but he couldn't figure it out at all. When he got down, he found Mutsuo suddenly stood beside him. Genichi said, "Mutsuo, you're smart, can you fix it?" To which Mutsuo slowly shook his head and said, "I'm not familiar with it, so I don't know how." Genichi gave back Mutsuo's light and returned home. Funnily enough, Mutsuo had actually fixed a utility pole before, despite not having any training in such a thing. This would be the last normal interaction Mutsuo would have, because beyond this point, he would turn into what has been described as a demon. With the village in darkness, he started to prepare his equipment. He made a cloth headband and attached 2 electronic torches to either side of the head facing where he would be looking. The manufacturer of this equipment is unknown, but they were less than 15 centimeters in length. The torches were new and had a long battery life for the time. There was actually a local custom of night fishermen who would do this in the area, which could have been inspiration for the unusual getup, but an illustration of a Japanese soldier in the Shonen Club magazine also had this, so there is no telling what the true inspiration was. This improvised headgear would mean that Mutsuo would be able to see in the dark, and those who looked at him would be blinded. Around his neck on a thin cord was what is known as a national lamp, which rested over his chest. It was made by the electronic company Panasonic under the trademark name of National Band Lamp. Although Japanese, it was based on Western designs but improved upon by integrating the battery and light compartments into one section. It was a small but powerful lamp for the time, and it would further illuminate the area where Mutsuo's body was facing together with the torches on his head. Mutsuo also prepared a cloth shoulder bag. Inside, he would put in approximately 100 shells for his modified Browning Auto 5, which could load 9 shells instead of the standard 5 as previously discussed. It had a design similar to a Japanese Imperial Army duffel bag. The shells had dum-dum bullets in them and used Mars smokeless powder. He attached his katana and 2 short swords to his belt, and he wore a black Japanese school uniform that has its origins in the military in terms of its design. Around his lower legs, he wore gaiters, a type of protective leg wrapping that prevents trousers from being caught on things as well as reducing leg fatigue during long walks. He also wore tabi shoes, which have a gap which separate the big toe from the rest. Gaiters have been widely used in Japan since the Edo era, and are still popular with labourers today. They were also often used by soldiers during the 20th century before long-laced boots made them obsolete. After preparing all this, from a secret area in the attic, he took out his Browning Auto 5. It was now 1:30 AM, the 21st of May 1938. It was time to execute his secret plan. First, he would go to do one of his most dreaded acts. He descended to the first floor of his home, put down his Browning, and picked up a woodcutter's axe that he had preemptively sharpened long ago. He made his way quietly to his 73-year-old grandmother Ine's room as she was fast asleep. He stood over her, raised the axe above his head, and swung it down. After repeated blows, her head and body were separated. He rinsed the axe clean with water, rested it against the wall, picked up his Browning, and went outside into the darkness. Mutsuo had planned things extremely well, even down to the order of the homes he would travel to in order to make sure his plan was a success. His time doing yobai taught him a lot about where to go at night, the quickest routes, home entry points, everything. The first house he went to was the home of Katsuyuki Kishida, located north of his own. Katsuyuki was the eldest son of the family and a childhood friend of Mutsuo's. Katsuyuki had passed the enlistment examination with an A grade, the highest, and had joined the Japanese Marine Corps in Yokosuka, so was actually not home at the time. Ashamed at being called unfit for service and sad about failing the exam, Mutsuo had some complex, envious feelings about his old friend. Inside the home was Katsuyuki's widow mother, 50-year-old Tsukiyo, Katsuyuki's younger brother, 14-year-old Yoshio, and second younger brother, 11-year-old Mamoru. Tsukiyo's daughter, 18-year-old Misa, was staying at Chiho Terai's home for work, something that Mutsuo knew. Since they lived in the countryside, the doors were unlocked, and Mutsuo sneaked in. Tsukiyo had had relations with Mutsuo in the past, but had started refusing and shunning him due to his aggression and illness, or made him pay lots of money. She had also been spreading rumors around the village about how he begged her for relations, so Mutsuo had a pretty strong grudge against her as a result of this. From doing yobai in the past, Mutsuo knew exactly where she would be sleeping. He crept into her room as she slept, drew his katana, and stabbed. Tsukio wasn't alone. Beside her were her two sons, who tragically both met the same fate that she did. Since Katsuyuki was away for the military, he was the only survivor from this home. It is thought that the reason he used only his katana in this home was because he didn't want to alert those around him, who would quickly hear gunshots if they sounded out in the night. Also, comparatively speaking, the home was an easy target without any men to potentially fight back. Mutsuo left the house and went to the home of 50-year-old Hideji Nishikawa. His wife, 43-year-old Tome, lived here. Tome had a terrible cold at the time, so her 22-year-old daughter Yoshiko and Tome's 22-year-old sister Chizuko had unusually come to stay at the home to take care of her. Mutsuo already knew about this, which was one of the reasons why he executed his plan on this day. He planned well, and didn't want to miss his chance to get them. Since Mutsuo had done yobai with Tome many times, he knew where she slept. Tome actually had quite a bad reputation in the village as she was a bit of a gossiper. She had spoken poorly of Mutsuo to the neighbors and spread news of his illness all over, causing him to be further isolated, so Mutsuo held a strong grudge against her. While rejecting Mutsuo's advances too, it was said she was particularly harsh in her criticisms of him. Mutsuo crept into her room, aimed his Browning at sleeping Tome, and pulled the trigger. He immediately moved into the adjacent room, where husband Hideji, daughter Yoshiko, and Tome's sister Chizuko were all sleeping. They had jolted awake due to the sound of the shot in the next room, but had little time to react since Mutsuo was already upon them. Mutsuo also had a grudge against Yoshiko. It is said that they had physical relations at one point, but this wasn't just the regular yobai. Mutsuo had actually fallen in love with her. She had, however, chosen another man and married into his family, leaving Mutsuo resentful and feeling betrayed. From point-blank range, he ended all three of their lives just as he had ended Tome's. Since he used dum-dum bullets that expanded upon impact, it was a terrible sight, and sadly, all occupants of this home didn't make it. Hideji was a strong, hard-working farmer who was well respected and a pillar in the community. He was very strong and imposing, so it is speculated that Mutsuo decided to use the Browning here because he feared that he could be overpowered if he used his katana. Many villagers commented afterwards that Hideji was likely extremely tired from a hard day's work, so Mutsuo was able to get the upper hand. The third home Mutsuo went to was that of 22-year-old Takashi Kishida. He was home with his 6 months pregnant wife, 20-year-old Chie, Takashi's mother, 70-year-old Tama, and Takashi's nephew, 18-year-old Takeo. Chie was actually the second daughter of Tome, who had just passed at Mutsuo's hand. Mutsuo sneaked inside and took Takashi and his wife out while they slept. They had no time to even rise from their futons. The sounds woke up the grandmother and nephew in the next room. As Mutsuo entered, Takeo showed tremendous courage and charged Mutsuo immediately in an attempt to protect himself and his grandmother. Unfortunately, Mutsuo quickly reacted, hitting Takeo in the jaw with the butt of his Browning. Several teeth flew across the ground as a result, and he fell to the floor. And as he fell to the floor, Mutsuo aimed and pulled the trigger. He then turned to the grandmother Tama and said, "I never had any grudge against you, but I have to do this because Chie married into your family." Mutsuo planned to end the entire bloodlines of the people who he felt had wronged him, and so was going after people even if they'd married into other homes, and anyone who stood in his way was, in his eyes, a target. He then aimed and shot Tama. Miraculously, despite her advanced age and the type of bullet used, she survived. The fourth home he went to was that of 6-year-old Masakazu Terai. Together with him at his home was his eldest son, 90-year-old Teiichi, his daughter-in-law, 20-year-old Miki Setsuko, his fifth daughter, 15-year-old Toki, and sixth daughter, 12-year-old Hana. Masakazu's daughter, 21-year-old Yuriko, was also there. This was the family home of Yuriko Terai, another woman that Mutsuo had fallen in love with at one point and had a relationship with. Yuriko had married another man, 28-year-old Yuichi Niwa, but they divorced 3 months later because it appears they were actually related and therefore worried about conceiving a child. Uichi was also quoted as saying he didn't have any feelings for Yuriko at all. However, that might not be entirely true. It seems that there were rumors that Mutsuo had been pursuing Yuriko so much that he would even sneak into her bedroom at night when her husband was there, causing the situation to become unbearable. Perhaps because Uichi felt ashamed, he may have lied about the reason for divorcing her by saying he didn't love her. After the divorce, seemingly in an attempt to get away from Mutsuo, Yuriko was quickly married off to another man in a different village. However, she along with her brother Teiichi and his wife Miki were visiting the family home to celebrate Teiichi's marriage on the 15th of May, 6 days prior. Mutsuo knew the family had gathered here, which was another reason why he chose this night. It is almost unbelievable how many events brought people together on this terrible day. The family were already awake as a result of the sounds of Mutsuo's shots ringing out in the village. Mutsuo came straight to the main entrance and opened the door. Masakazu asked Mutsuo, "What's going on?" before Mutsuo shot. After witnessing this, the rest of the family started running through the dark house to escape. Teiichi managed to jump out of a window and started to flee, but Mutsuo aimed through it and shot at him, hitting him in the back. Toki and Hana tried to escape out of the exit on the side entrance of the home by opening a storm door in the hallway, but they were met with the same fate as Teiichi. Miki, petrified, also sadly met the same end as the others while cowering in a corner of the hallway. What should have been a time for celebrating a lovely union between a new husband and wife turned into a nightmare. Hearing the gunfire and the commotion within the home, Yuriko immediately realized it was Mutsuo and that she was the target. She quickly escaped the home intending to flee to Hideji Nishikawa's home, the second one that had been targeted during Mutsuo's rampage. She had no idea what had happened there. While running though, she fell down and changed directions when she got up, fearing Mutsuo would catch up to her. She went to Torazo Terai's home, who was actually a close relative of Mutsuo's, and asked for help, but he wouldn't let her in. Just when she thought all hope was lost, the door to the main Torai home, Mokichi's house, opened and someone beckoned her in. She ran inside and explained the situation. The people there had been awoken from all the shots, but had stayed inside out of fear of what was going on. Like Yuriko, Mokichi also guessed the culprit was Mutsuo, but he courageously let Yuriko in anyway to protect her. As Mokichi closed the door, Mutsuo rushed towards it. In the home was 45-year-old Mokichi, his wife 41-year-old Nobuko, their second son 17-year-old Shinji, and fourth daughter 21-year-old Yukiko. In the annex of the building was 86-year-old Koshiro, who was Mokichi's father, and of course Yuriko just entered. This was actually the family home of Mutsuo's grandmother, Ine, before she had married into the Toi family. The family had a very good standing since the home was that of a prefectural assembly member, so they were rather wealthy. Mutsuo had not intended to go to this house at all, but because Yuriko had fled inside, he now made it an unexpected target. Within the home, the family were desperately trying to keep all entrances locked, holding them shut and piling up heavy objects. Mutsuo shouted furiously, "Open up, if you don't, I'll shoot," before angrily banging on the door. The elderly Koshiro, who didn't understand what was going on, exited his annex and shouted something at Mutsuo. Mutsuo turned around to face him and immediately started shooting. Koshiro, while reclusive, was said to have had a good heart and was actually very kind to Mutsuo during his life. Villagers would often see soldiers off when going to war, and while Mutsuo was feeling down since he failed the enlistment exam, it was Koshiro who had told Mutsuo to go see them off to help rid him of his bad feelings on the matter. When Mokichi saw Koshiro being shot, he felt he needed to do something. He ordered his son Shinji out the back door to run to Mutsuo's uncle, Kazumoto Torai's home. Kazumoto had taken care of Mutsuo since early childhood, so if there was anyone who could stop all this, talk Mutsuo out of it, it was him. Shinji ran and Mutsuo noticed. Mutsuo ran around the back hoping to catch him, shouting, "I'll shoot if you run away," but he never actually fired. Shinji ran into the darkness of the bamboo grove beside the house and hid, hoping Mutsuo wouldn't find him. Mutsuo searched after losing sight of him, scanning the area with the torches attached to the sides of his head. Shinji even held his breath for fear his panting would draw attention. Unable to find him, Mutsuo returned to the home. In an attempt to lure the family out, he lied, trying to claim that he had caught Shinji, saying twice, "Shinji, confess. Confess or I'll shoot." Nobuko cried. He caught Shinji while holding her husband in distress, but Mokichi was a smart man who didn't fall for Mutsuo's tricks. Mokichi silently moved to an open door and peered outside. He saw Mutsuo standing right there, but no Shinji, which made him feel relieved. Yuriko screamed to Mutsuo, "I've caused you so much trouble. I'm sorry, please forgive me." While she had nothing to apologize for, of course, she was saying this in an attempt to get him to stop. Mutsuo then moved to the back door and said, "If you don't open up, I'll bring an axe and cut the door down." He banged the door over and over, eventually losing patience. In the end, he shot twice into the door. One shot went through the door, kitchen panels, and into a cupboard. As it did, it sent shrapnel and splinters in all directions. One piece lightly grazed Yuriko's neck as she desperately held the front door closed. The other shot went into Yukiko's femur as she held herself against the door, causing light injuries. After realizing that there was nothing he could do and his carefully crafted plan had a chance of failing, he reluctantly left. Shinji and the other neighbors could alert the authorities after all, so he felt like he needed to hurry up. He could have actually run home and back to pick up the axe, but considering Mokichi's home was not part of his plan, he decided to leave it alone, despite one of his primary targets, Yuriko, being within. After Mutsuo left, the family all hid under the floorboards of the inner room. The sixth home Mutsuo went to was that of 20-year-old Koji Terai. His 45-year-old mother Toyo was also present. Fortunately, Toyo's other two sons were away. One was working in Okayama City, and another was on a high school field trip to Ise Shrine. Toyo was a widow like many in the village, and recently she had rejected Mutsuo's advances in the past while commenting on his aggressive nature and illness. It seems that Mutsuo had paid her for relations many times. She was also said to have a relationship with Kuraichi Terai, a wealthy man in the village who used to pay widows for company, which meant she pushed Mutsuo further away. Toyo had also been the matchmaker for both Yuriko and Yoshiko and their husbands, the women that Mutsuo loved. It is actually said that Toyo had pushed Yoshiko away from Mutsuo even though she had feelings for him as well. Because of this, Mutsuo had a particular hatred for Toyo. Despite the commotion around them, Toyo and Koji were still asleep in different rooms when Mutsuo entered their unlocked home, and took both of them out swiftly with his Browning. The seventh home that he went to was that of 85-year-old Senkichi Terai, 80-year-old Chiyo, eldest son 64-year-old Asaichi, grandson 41-year-old Isao, and the grandson's wife 38-year-old Kii. This home had a room for silkworm raising, and because it was silk season, 3 more people were staying in the silk room: Asaichi's 65-year-old wife Tora, Tsukiyo Kishida's eldest daughter 19-year-old Misa, and Ito Niwa's eldest daughter 21-year-old Tsuruyo. Mutsuo didn't really have a grudge against Senkichi or his family, but did against the 2 that were staying over, Misa and Tsuruyo. Misa had rejected Mutsuo's advances in the past, even when he offered gifts. Her mother, who Mutsuo had already murdered with his katana, had also kept her away from him. This rejection made him angry. Tsuruyo had also rejected Mutsuo's advances. Mutsuo actually pitied her since she had also suffered from tuberculosis like he did, but when she rejected his advances during Yobai, he felt resentment. Tsuruyo's older brother was Uichi, Yuriko's first husband, so there is likely some hatred there too. Mutsuo entered the home, but ignored the main building and went straight to the silk room on the 2nd floor since he knew the 2 young women would be there. He aimed and sadly took out both Misa and Tsuruyo as they slept. Tora awoke and tried to escape, crawling out of her bed and onto the balcony. She desperately begged for her life, saying, "Please spare me," but her pleas were ignored. Mutsuo shot 4 times. Naturally, the family on the first floor heard the commotion and they had to act fast. They gathered together and decided that Isao and Ki would hide in the attic, Chiyo would hide under the floorboards, and Asaichi would hide under a futon in the back storeroom. Senkichi, the head of the house, remained alone in the large tatami room, sitting by the kotatsu. He was old, had bad legs, and was willing to accept whatever came his way in hopes that his family would be safe. He showed a lot of bravery by standing his ground like he did. Mutsuo burst into the room, screaming, "Are you here? I have a gun." Mutsuo caught sight of Senkichi and aimed, but he didn't shoot. He said, "I can even shoot the elderly. I already killed the head of a family, Koshiro Terai. What should I do about you?" However, Mutsuo seemed to back down a little, eventually saying, "Because you never said anything bad about me, I will spare you. But when I'm gone, I suppose you will speak ill of me." He then ignored Senkichi and moved further into the home. He went into the storeroom where Asaichi was hiding under the futon and kicked the pillow. Mutsuo then thrust the barrel of his Browning into him when he tried to get up. Mutsuo said, "The young ones, meaning Isao and his wife Kii, have escaped. If you move, I'll shoot. Stay still." Asaichi replied with, "I won't move, so spare me." To which Mutsuo replied with, "Alright, I will." Mutsuo further said, "Is life that precious?" To which Asaichi nodded repeatedly before Mutsuo left. As he was leaving, Mutsuo looked at the bicycle remaining at the home and said, "Even if you escape, I am not worried." It is speculated that he said this because with the bicycle left at the home, it meant Mutsuo thought Isao and Ki had fled on foot, which in turn would mean that it would take a long time to reach a police station to report on what was happening. You see, when Mutsuo had ridden his bicycle back and forth before, he was actually testing how long it would take for someone to get to the police station to report what he was doing. It is unclear why Mutsuo was targeting Isao and his wife. Isao was actually a relative of his and had done a lot to support Mutsuo in the past. Mutsuo, however, was very distrustful of Isao. Because Mutsuo was very intelligent, Isao had once recommended that he become a school teacher, to which Mutsuo replied angrily with, "Telling me to work to become a teacher when I am this sick is the same as telling me to die. Are you trying to make me pass away young so you can take my home?" Mutsuo also believed that the police search of his home and confiscation of his items came from Isao tipping them off. Isao had indeed tipped them off, but he was not the primary cause of the search. That was the grandmother, Ine. The next home Mutsuo went to was that of 28-year-old Uichi Niwa, where he lived with his widowed mother, 47-year-old Ito. Uichi's sister, Tsuruyo, had just lost her life at the previous home. As previously discussed, Uichi was the former husband of Yuriko, the woman that Mutsuo was obsessed with, so he really hated Uichi. Ito had also turned down Mutsuo for physical relations, and had avoided him due to his illness. This family also had a room for silkworms. Mutsuo burst into the silkworm raising room as Ito had come to check on the burning charcoal that was warming the home. Mutsuo said to her, "I already killed Tsuruyo, now it's your turn." She was hit in both thighs by Mutsuo's Browning. It is unclear why Mutsuo seemed to purposefully aim at this part of the body, but she actually didn't pass away from this right away. The shots woke Uichi in the main house. He quickly ran to the back door and sprinted towards the West Kamo police station. Mutsuo went into the main house after him, but he was too late. Uichi, another one of Mutsuo's prime targets, was gone. Uichi ran on foot to the Nishikamo police station, however there were no officers there, so he made for the main Kamo police station instead, which was 3 kilometers away. Along the way, he borrowed a bicycle from another family and rode to the station, arriving there in 25 minutes. Uichi left his home at around 2:10 AM, so he arrived there at 2:35. The officer at the station, Takeo Imada, had been keeping an eye on Mutsuo ever since the incident with the police search, and had been visiting him to offer advice on changing his ways. Uichi shouted, "Officer, something's wrong. Wake up. There's been a murder." The officer awoke from the shouting through the glass door and Uichi's banging, and before Uichi could even say any of the details, the officer said, has Toi killed someone? Officer Imada immediately called Detective Kitamura, who was on night duty at the Tsuyama police station, to report the situation. He also called Officer Inazawa at Higashi Kamo police station in the neighboring village. He asked them to assemble the fire brigade and other officers. Officer Imada also spoke to his wife to tell her to arrange for a doctor, commandeer a railway telephone, and organize for the village fire alarms to be turned on to alert the people of the strange incident. He and Uichi then headed to Kamo village together. This was the first official reporting of the terrible events that were occurring. While all of this was going on, Mutsuo was continuing his rampage. The ninth home Mutsuo went to was that of 37-year-old Sueo Ikezawa, which was on a hill at the eastern side of the village. He was home with his 34-year-old wife Miya, their second son 12-year-old Akira, third son 9-year-old Shozo, fourth son 5th-year-old Akio, and Suyo's parents, 74-year-old Katsuichi and 72-year-old Tsuru. Their eldest son, 14-year-old Hajime, was fortunately away on the school trip to Ise Island, the same as one of Toyo's sons. This was actually the family home of Matsuko Terai, one of the women Mutsuo despised the most. Sensing danger before and feeling scared of Mutsuo, she had fled to Hanase in Kyoto with her husband and children just before the incident. Being unable to enact his revenge on Matsuko, he came to her family home instead. Sueo had already awoken due to the sounds of gunfire from Uichi's home. When he opened the front door to see what was going on, he saw the terrifying shadow of a man running up the hill towards him. The 3 lights on Mutsuo's body were said to be a terrifying sight in the darkness, as though he was some sort of demon or ghost. As he ran up the hill, Mutsuo screamed twice, "I'll kill you." Sueo fell to the floor in fear before standing up and yelling to his family to flee. He ran immediately to the back of the house, opened the door and jumped out, running into the bamboo grove to escape. Mutsuo had anticipated this and had actually run to the back of the house instead of the front. As Sueo ran, he shot after him wildly, but completely missed and Sueo escaped. Mutsuo didn't try to pursue him and instead entered into the home through the back entrance. Within, he sadly took the lives of Sueo's wife Miya, his youngest son Akio, and his elderly parents Katsuichi and Tsuru. The second son Akira and third son Shozo miraculously came out completely unscathed. They had hidden within their futons, and Mutsuo had somehow either not noticed them or spared them for unknown reasons. Their survival was one of the very few positive aspects of this incident. Sueo continued to hide in the bamboo grove and had suffered an injury to his knee, but soon ran barefoot to the Kamo police station to raise the alarm. As the attack on Sueo's house was going on, village office clerk Noboru Nishikawa was keeping watch from his home. He was the man who had dealt with Mutsuo at the enlistment examination and learned that he had tuberculosis. Noboru slightly opened the back door and heard lots of shouting and shots coming from the direction of Sueo's home. From how he had been acting recently, he correctly guessed that the perpetrator was Mutsuo, locked the doors of his home tightly, and instructed his family to hide under the floorboards. While he was aware of the danger, he did not hide, and instead said to his family, "If Mutsuo breaks in, I want to ask him why he is doing this." Noboru's wife had heard some banging on the walls coming from outside at one point, but this family all escaped a terrible fate. Mutsuo next went to the home of 61-year-old Kuraichi Terai after running back down the hill from Sueo's home before running back up another slope extending 200 meters. Keeping in mind all the equipment he was carrying, how long he was running around, and his illness, the fact that he could run around like this is quite a feat. The adrenaline must have been coursing through his body. Kuraichi was a wealthy man whose property was surrounded by a fancy stone wall. He had a high social status, and through Mutsuo spying on his neighbors, Mutsuo had learned that Kuraichi had used his wealth to buy the company of multiple women in the village, such as Matsuko and Mio, which made Mutsuo very envious, because even when he offered gifts and money, women would quickly turn him down. Kuraichi lived in the home with his 56-year-old wife Hama and their 28-year-old son Masaru. When Mutsuo reached the front gate, Hama had grown suspicious of what was going on in the village and so had opened the hallway shutters to peer outside. Since it was dark, she held a candle to do so. At that moment, Mutsuo aimed and shot. Hama was hit in her right elbow, but she was a tough woman and she composed herself long enough to close the shutters again while enduring the pain. She, along with her husband Kudaichi, locked them down to prevent Mutsuo from getting in. Mutsuo banged on the door, demanding that it be opened. When the occupants failed to do so, Mutsuo began shooting wildly into the home. Of the 5 rounds he shot, one sadly hit Hama again in the same arm she was hit in before. Kudaichi ran up to the 2nd floor of his home, and to the village below he screamed, "Murder! Help me!" He screamed at the top of his lungs. The voice was described to be as loud as a roaring beast that echoed around the village, with even faraway homes hearing it. Mutsuo naturally heard this and shot up at the window, cutting off Kudaichi's shouting. Fortunately he missed, and the shots came out through the roof, sending tiles raining down. With much of the village already alerted to the situation and the authorities likely on their way, Mutsuo decided not to spend a lot of time here and moved on. The next he went to was that of Kazuo Okamoto's home in Sakamoto village. It was a little far from his current location, and instead of taking the usual residential road that everyone took to move between the areas, he went into the mountains and followed the animal trail through the darkness. He had researched the path a lot during his planning in the time prior to this night, and had anticipated that the road was risky given how much of a commotion he had caused. Mutsuo ran nearly 2 kilometers using the light of his torches to see the way. His time walking in the mountains to recover had served him well. Eventually he arrived at 51-year-old Kazuo's home where he lived with his 32-year-old wife Mio. Mutsuo had had relations with Mio through yobai as we discussed previously, but this had recently stopped due to Kazuo's interference. Mio had also had a relationship with Kudaichi Terai, the man from the previous home who had escaped unscathed. This made Mutsuo jealous, since Mio was one of the few people that kept relations with him until the end. As he ran onto the property, Mutsuo screamed the names Kazuo and Mio. It cannot be completely verified given the lack of witnesses at some locations, but it is said that he actually screamed the names of all the people as he entered each household's property, except the first home. It seems that Kazuo heard this, grabbed his air rifle, and turned on the lights. Sakamoto, where he lived, had been spared the power outage, so visibility was good. Kazuo came out into the main tatami room to fight against Mutsuo. As he did so, he said to his wife, "Has Toi come again? I will teach him a lesson this day." When he confronted the intruder, the air rifle failed to do anything serious, and after firing it, Kazuo was stunned at the sight of Mutsuo, given his very strange appearance and face stained red. Mutsuo aimed and ended Kazuo's life. Mio tried to escape out the home, but she too sadly met the same fate. And this, in a way, was the end of the incident. Mutsuo had executed his plan and visited all the homes he intended to, and some he had not. It was now around 3 AM, an hour and a half since he began with his grandmother Ine at his own home. Roughly 500 meters from Kazuo's home was 66-year-old Takemoto Ichimatsu's house in a village called Aoyama. He lived here with his grandson Atsuo. According to Ichimatsu, he heard someone saying "good evening" repeatedly outside. Ichimatsu answered the door, believing that the person had a telegram for him, but instead he was greeted with Mutsuo, who came into the main room of the home. Ichimatsu was surprised by Mutsuo's striking appearance, thinking he was a robber. Sensing the old man's unease, Mutsuo said, "Don't be scared, old man," before saying, "Quickly, old man, I want some paper and a pencil. A police car is following me up here." Ichimatsu struggled to find what Mutsuo was requesting, so Mutsuo turned to the grandson and said, "Ah-chan, you're here, right? The old man won't make it in time, so please go get me some paper and a pencil." Ichimatsu was visibly frightened, but Mutsuo said, "I won't shoot the innocent, so don't worry," which completely contradicts what he had done the previous hour. Ichimatsu replied with, "I've come this far, so I don't want you to shoot me," to which Mutsuo replied with, "I thought I could take care of something if I came to your place. If I die here, it will be inconvenient for you, so you better hurry up. Atsuo finally gave Mutsuo a notebook and a pencil. Mutsuo tore out some pages, took the pencil, and ran before Ichimatsu had time to ask anything. When he left, Atsuo said to his grandfather, "That's toy." Mutsuo had become isolated from the adults for the most part, but as discussed before, he was quite popular with the children, giving them sweets and telling stories, so he was well known with them, even among the children that he didn't regularly see. He was fond of Atsuo, and so affectionately called him A-chan. Mutsuo followed the Arasaka Pass that leads from Yoshishige to Tsuyama. This is a steep, thin road covered in pebbles, making it very difficult to run along. Prosecutor Nakagaki Kiyoharu, who later visited the area, described it as follows. The slope was difficult and filled with pebbles, and multiple cracks had been formed from running rainwater, making it extremely difficult to climb. As we approached the ridge of Arasaka Pass, the road became increasingly narrow and steep. Our breath became rough, and we can only marvel at the physical strength of the perpetrator. Mutsuo finally reached the top of Arasaka Pass, about 1.5 kilometers from Ichimatsu's home. He then took a narrow path and soon reached an open area at the top called Hermit's Castle. It was the site of a famous peasant uprising in 1866. Mutsuo took off all his equipment and lined it up neatly, picking a place amongst some weeds and pine trees, sat down and began to write. "I'm writing this letter as I'm about to end things. I decided to go ahead with my plan, but with how circumstances developed, I did not shoot those I should have shot, and shot those I should not have shot. I'm so sorry, grandmother. I'm truly sorry. My grandmother acted as my mother since I was 2 years old. I should not have killed her, but I thought of the regret I would have caused, so I did what I did. I wanted to die peacefully, but I did something so wretched. I'm truly sorry. I cry. I'm so sorry that all I can do is cry. I'm so sorry to my sister. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I'm a worthless brother. Because I did this, even though it was out of resentment, you don't need to put me in a grave. A field is fine. I cried a lot because of the coldness and oppression of society during my 4 years of illness. I cried because of the lack of love from my relatives. Society should be more sympathetic to tuberculosis patients. I realized my weakness. I hope I will be born a strong person next time. I was very unhappy with my life. Next time I will be born happy. Things didn't go as planned. The reason I decided to carry this out today was because Yuriko Terai, who I had a relationship with in the past, had come to Kyo. Yoshiko Nishikawa had also come here. However, Yuriko had escaped, and so did Kudaichi Terai. It was a shame he was allowed to live. People like that should be banished from the world. Just because he has money, he targets widows who need to make a living, and everyone in Kyo has dealings with him. Junichi Kishida is also a poacher, and is unpopular in the area. People like him should be banished from this world. Dawn is approaching. I will die now. Mutsuo's location overlooked all of Kyo where he grew up. It also provided a view of all the surrounding villages, and even Kurami, the village where Mutsuo was born before he moved to Kyo with his grandmother. Perhaps he came here to see the place for one last time. At around 4:30 AM, he unbuttoned the front of his black uniform, pointed the Browning towards his chest, and used his toe. Authorities would find what was left of him 6 hours later. Naturally, a huge investigation took place, but medical assistance took priority. Sadly, Ito, who had been wounded in the fires, passed away around the same time Mutsuo's body was found, and Hama, who had been hit twice in the same arm, also passed away in Sagano Hospital 12 hours later. In total, 30 people had sadly lost their lives at the hands of Mutsuo, with 3 others injured, some very badly. 70-year-old Tama, who had been shot but miraculously survived to make a full recovery, famously said, "If the young died but I live on, there is no God or Buddha." Including Mutsuo, 31 people had lost their lives that night, which was roughly 40% of the area at the time. The authorities took photographs of the village in the aftermath, but I strongly recommend you do not try to look for them. When the investigators searched the Toi family home, they found 2 more letters written by Mutsuo. Since they contain a lot of information we've already gone over, I will pick out some noteworthy parts. As I lay in bed, I thought I might never be able to recover from my illness. This, coupled with my feelings of despair, led me to feel great humiliation at the hands of Tome Nishikawa. I was mentally weak due to my illness, so it caused irreparable humiliation. It was my fault too, so I apologized. I clasped my hands together and cried, but she still hated me, treated me harshly, insulted me, and even made up things about me. As a result, I became a laughingstock. My credibility, my virtue, or anything about me that earned the respect of others disappeared. My face was tarnished. Because of this, I gradually began to lose hope in this world. My illness wasn't getting better, it was actually getting worse. I began to think it was really incurable like everyone said. Nishikawa looked at me with cold eyes and spoke ill of me behind my back. Whenever I heard this, it hurt my heart, and I was troubled day and night for a year. However, whenever I thought about my elderly grandmother and ancestral home, I felt I had to be strong and live righteously, but my illness only got worse, and I felt I would never recover. The way people looked down on those with tuberculosis, and especially the harsh treatment I received from Tome Nishikawa, made me give up all the hopes a young man has. The sadness I felt when I decided to carry out my plans is indescribable. I was so sad I cried. Day after day, the grudge I felt against Tome Nishikawa grew. I thought that if I am incurable, I might as well teach her a lesson since she had tormented me. She was a pain in the past, but now she lives a life of luxury, so she must be arrogant and despise the sick and weak like me. I hated her, so I decided to take revenge and erase her from this world. There was also Matsuko, the wife of Hiroshi Terai. I had a relationship with her previously. Before I got sick, we were close, and we said we would help each other out because we didn't have many relatives. But when I became ill, she treated me harshly. I was angry but held it in. Even a woman who was so close to me would change her mind when I became sick. She said a lot of bad things about me. I was so overcome with tears and anger that I couldn't raise my head for a while. From then on, I tried to make myself stronger so I could get my revenge. I forced myself to get out of bed to go for walks even though it was very difficult. When I threw away any hope I would recover, I actually started to get better. I felt so happy in the moment and thought that I could get my revenge against Nishikawa and Matsuko. Perhaps because I had such thoughts in my mind, the people around me grew suspicious. Some of my relatives warned my grandmother, and she watched over my actions. I also had times when I felt nostalgic, recalling the moments at elementary schools when all my teachers loved me and I was very happy. At times like this, I thought to myself that I should not be caught up in petty emotions, but should instead cast aside my hatred and become the person I was before, when I was honest and simple. I sometimes thought to myself, if only I was healthy, I wouldn't feel this way. However, people were gradually turning hostile and hateful. When I felt this, I discarded my idea of changing for the better. It's a shame Matsuko and her family ran away. They took a few pieces of furniture and fled to Kyoto or Tokyo. It's pathetic to pass leaving them behind, but there's nothing I can do. I'm extremely sorry to my parents, who passed away when I was 2, for destroying their ancestral home. It would be a shame to pass like this without saying anything to my sister, but I couldn't let her know. I have no choice but to make her accept that she had a useless little brother. It's not that I don't think about my family and sister, but if I carry on like this, I will destroy myself with tuberculosis. Mutsuo then ended this letter with a final statement seemingly to the authorities. He wrote, "The above is my confession, or rather my motivation for being like this. Written on the 18th of May, if I don't move quickly, my illness will only weaken me. I am writing this so the world will know that I am not mentally ill, but that I had resolved to pass on. I have an incurable disease, but because of the oppression and cruelty of my neighbors and because of what happened with these women, I want my revenge." Mutsuo's letter to his sister had a different tone to the first, angrier one. Like before, since we have discussed some of the content already, I'll pick out a few parts. Sister, please forgive me for passing without speaking to you. I thought I had to live a strong, righteous life, but I suffered incurable tuberculosis and great humiliation. Please do not blame me, and forgive me as an unfortunate person. I thought about ending things alone, doing nothing, but I also had a grudge that I could not rid myself of. When I became sick, my mind felt like it was in a desert or behind enemy lines. Everyone around me was like a demon, and they treated me so harshly that my illness only got worse. When I think about you, sister, who will be left behind, the cold eyes that will look at you as the sibling of a murderer, my thoughts become faint. But there is nothing I can do now. Please forgive me, sister. I would like to be buried near my parents, but since I have done all this, I will let you decide what to do. However, I would like to be as close to them as possible, so that when I go to the underworld, I will live near them. Please also appropriately get rid of the rice fields and house. I have 2 insurance policies, each that I pay 50 yen a month for, so please take care of them too. I am very sorry to my parents in the underworld and the Japanese nation, but I must have my revenge. Best regards, your brother. From these 2 letters left at the home and the letter he wrote just before his passing on the mountaintop, we can see that his actions were driven by despair at being shunned by the village and sadness for his worsening condition. He directs anger to 2 people directly, Tome and Matsuko, for treating him harshly and spreading rumors around the neighbors. There isn't any way to verify everything Mutsuo wrote about them, but given that it was his final writings before the incident, some find it hard to think he would lie so much in it. You could argue that he knew he was going to do something terrible and maybe wanted to shift some of the blame onto others, but it seems unlikely. Regardless of what is the true events, there is absolutely no justification for what occurred that night. It was a terrible thing that still haunts Japan to this day, nearly 100 years later. Speaking of the sister, she was actually in the final stages of pregnancy when the incident occurred. Mutsuo's crimes actually made her husband's family try to pressure her not to give birth, but fortunately she did so successfully. Usually when one commits such terrible crimes such as this, the perpetrator's family is ostracized from the community. However, those who knew Minako understood that she was a very kind woman, and they actually felt great sympathy for her, so fortunately she wasn't shunned or discriminated against. It is not conclusively proven given the secrecy surrounding it, but it is said that she and other relatives buried Mutsuo's remains just outside the boundary of the family graveyard. The grave is not properly marked, but a natural, uncut stone is said to mark it, and weeds and shrubbery have now covered it. There are rumors the remains were moved at one point, but this may just be to deter curious visitors. Considering this grave is also a book cover detailing the incident, I would say it is very likely the location. Like her brother Mutsuo, Minako also suffered from tuberculosis, but surprisingly she lived a fairly long life. She ran an udon restaurant in Tsuyama and was constantly surrounded by people. She remained active until the very end, when she passed away in 1991 at the age of 78 from a heart attack. Mutsuo's home was abandoned after the incident since both occupants had passed away, her sister lived with her husband, and others felt like the place was stigmatized. Naturally, it became derelict, but still remained standing until 2015, when it was finally demolished. Most of the surviving or spared residents left the village and moved elsewhere, feeling that it was too sad and tragic to continue living there with the infamy it now had. Since some of the rumors about who Mutsuo was having physical relations with and who had treated him badly couldn't be verified, there was now a lot of mistrust in the village, leading to a breakdown of the community. Now, as of the making of this video, only around 30 people reside in the village today. They are mostly the elderly who are retired or continue to work the farms, and it seems they keep to themselves, mostly since some of their old relatives and ancestors are linked to the incident. There was nationwide mourning and of course a lot of funeral processions. Graves of the victims dot all over the small village too, giving it an eerie feeling for visitors today, but it is a beautiful part of the country. Saying this, however, those in neighbouring villages tried to keep people positive, organising events and parties to try to cheer people up and help the area heal. There was also a bigger drive to improve mental well-being. Although Minako received sympathy, other relatives were not so lucky. It is falsely rumoured that those who were unharmed in the attack knew of the plot but failed to report it, forcing them to be ostracised. Many related to the Toy family moved away to start anew or became reclusive. Despite the scale of the incident and all the sadness that came with it, it has inspired both fictional and non-fictional forms of media to be produced. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the 1977 film Yatsuhakamura, or Village of Eight Graves, which takes heavy influence from Mutsuo's appearance and style of attack, but it is a work of fiction which incorporates a ghost story. The 1983 film called Ushimitsu no Muro, or Village of Doom, however, which you are now seeing a scene from, is more of a non-fictional version of the incident, but still embellishes the story a little. I haven't seen either of these films outside of a few scenes, but they are quite famous and I have read online that they are actually quite good. Looking at Mutsuo's life, it's hard not to feel a tiny bit of sympathy for him. The situation with his parents, his illness, his wasted intelligence, his failure to get into the military, and his despair at being shunned by the people must have been very hard to deal with, and as his letters stated, made him feel compelled to do what he did. However, there is absolutely nothing that could excuse what he did. Not only did he seem to treat the female villagers as nothing more than objects for his own gratification, but the scale of the incident, not to mention that some of those affected were young children, cannot be excused, and we must not forget that when looking into the crime. He literally took out entire families and likely destroyed the lives of hundreds. He truly was, as described, a demon. Through the frame of a YouTube video, it's easy to think quite narrowly, but there are a lot of gruesome details surrounding this, and I cannot even begin to imagine how the victims must have felt in their final moments. The children, those who were backed into a corner and begging for their lives as a shadowy figure blinded them with torches, it doesn't bear thinking about. And honestly, this was quite a hard video to make. I just hope that they may rest in peace and that their families were able to find some joy in their lives. It seems Mutsuo caused the end of the village in a way, but hopefully there are some lessons that society can learn from here so another such incident can be avoided. Thank you for watching my 47th YouTube video. If you liked it, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you wish to see more videos like this about Japan. I know this was quite a long video, my longest so far, but I hope you stuck with it and watched until the end. I put a lot of effort into it and even read numerous books to get a lot of the details. This case has actually been covered quite a bit on YouTube already, but it is one I've wanted to do for a while given how bizarre and horrifying it is. What do you think about the Tsuyama incident? Could it have been prevented? Could something have been done differently to stop it? Let me know in the comments below. I wonder what happened to those who gave Mutsuo the tools he used to execute his plan. Without Yuichi buying the Browning after Mutsuo lost his license, would this have even happened at all? It's often the small things that could cause ripples. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble now. Anyway, that's enough from me. Until next time, goodbye.